So you've gotten yourself a 5th gen Honda VFR 800. Congratulations. Now you want to adjust the valves, or at least check the clearance on the valves, as you're supposed to do every 16,000 miles. Well, let's see what this looks like. To get to the valves, you got to remove a few things, like the fuel tank, the air box, the valve covers, and this little access cap to the crank on the right side of the engine. You also need to know a few things about your bike, like which cylinders are which. And ultimately in this job, we want to get to the point where we can get some feeler gauges between the cam lobes and the valve lifters, so that we can actually determine the valve clearances. But first, we need to go over some more things. Like once you take this cap off, underneath it you're going to find what's technically known as the ignition pulse generator rotor. And this guy has marks on it. And all these marks reference the cylinders. And you're going to be lining these marks up with this index line on the case. And there's 3 things you got to line up correctly in order to be able to check the valve clearances correctly. And you also need to be able to find top dead center for an individual piston. And now that we know all these things, we can go and actually check the valve clearances. And I'm going to write everything down and keep track of it. Alright, so inside our crankcase we've got this guy here, which is uninstalled at the moment. I will reinstall it in a second. But this is where our index marks are on the bottom end of the engine. So you can see there's a 4T here, a 3T there, 2T, 1T, marks, designations on this wheel. Alright, so we got cylinders. 1, 2, 3, 4. And each cylinder has 2 intake valves and 2 exhaust valves. So intake 1, intake 2, exhaust 1, exhaust 2. Now I'm going to go through here and check all these. Alright, so we've got our valve covers off on both cylinder heads. This side and the other side you can't see over here on the front of the bike. So this is our example. This is cylinder number 1 up here. This is cylinder number 3 over there. Here's our camshafts. This is the intake camshaft. You can tell because it's near the intake itself. This is where the air and gas come in through here. This is our fuel rail. This is our throttle bodies. This is going to feed directly into the head here, and on the exhaust side is over here, and the exhaust itself hooks up to this cylinder head on this side. So intake, exhaust. And it's the mirror opposite on the other side. So here's our intake camshaft. Here's a lobe of the camshaft. So there's one intake lobe right there. You can see how it's rounded. This is the pointed end of it. If we look below that, you'll see a lifter, which is like a little cylinder basically. And that cylinder on the other side of that cylinder is the valve stem, and then the valve goes down to the head, and that's what opens up the valve to let the engine breathe air in. There's supposed to be a clearance between this lobe and that valve lifter. On the underside of that valve lifter are little shims that you can adjust. You can take the shims out and put different size shims in there to set your clearance between the valve lifter and the lobe, the camshaft lobe. We need to check our clearance because over time the valves may seat better into the head itself, and actually your clearances will get smaller because the valve seats more and the valve stem comes up further towards the lobe here, and it actually decreases our clearance. So that's a possibility of what will happen over time as the mileage on the bike goes up. So we need to check these things periodically to reset the clearance if necessary. To do that, I've got a set of feeler gauges here in different sizes. They have a whole bunch of different sizes. The ones we only need, well, the ones we're aiming for are 6 thousandths, this guy right here, and 12 thousandths, this guy right there. So the intake is supposed to be 6 thousandths. The exhaust is supposed to be 12 thousandths. And it's plus or minus like 2 thousandths or something. So let's check these, but we have to make sure that the cam lobes are set at a specific spot. So this is the camshaft up here, and this is supposed to be timed with the crankshaft, which is down here. You can access it through this little port on the side of the case. You take that little cap off, and then you get to that bolt in there. Pay no mind to the giant holes in my side case. That's a whole nother issue, but this normal case will have a cap right here. You remove that cap. Inside there you'll see this little bolt. There's also writing around here as well. So on the writing on there, it'll have marks for each cylinder. There's 1T, 2T, 3T, and 4T. And so we're going to rotate this guy around so that it hits specific marks. We'll start with 1T, which is cylinder number 1. And you may have to rotate this around more than once. Like you have to hit the 1T twice in order to get the camshafts to sit the way they need to. So we can rotate the crankshaft around and have the 1T at the top where it's supposed to be, but our camshaft lobes won't be where they're supposed to be. And to solve that, we just rotate this guy around again 360 degrees, and that will actually rotate these guys 180 degrees. I'll kind of demonstrate that for you. Alright, so here is one version of 1T. I've got the crankshaft set at 1T on the index mark, and you can see the lobes on the camshaft are pointing sort of in and down. Both of them are pointing towards the inside here and down. And they're actually coming into contact slightly with the lifter on the bottom there. And so there's zero clearance on these right now. So if I were to try and take 6 thousandths and get it in there, like it kind of goes in there a little bit on the one side, but the side with the lobe, there's no clearance in there. And so this is not what we want. I'm going to rotate the crankshaft 360 degrees. I'm going to bring that 1T all the way around again. Alright, so there we are. That's where it's supposed to be. You can see the lobe on this side is off to this side is over on this, the lobe is over here, and the lobe is over there. And so with those lobes up, now we should have our clearance the way we were supposed to have it on the bottom, so we can actually read it and get our feeler gauge in here. So here's 6 thousandths, this is for the intake. Now I can get this guy in and see how I can pass that all the way under that camshaft now. It actually is probably more than 6 thousandths because I'm not getting a whole lot of drag from this. You want it to get in there, and you want to be able to slide it and have some drag, like there's a little bit of pressure on it. Which that one feels a little bit too easy. It's too easy to push it under there. So let's go up to like 8 thousandths and see if we can get that under there. No, All right, so 8 thousandths does not go under. 7 thousandths, let's try that. 7 thousandths does not want to go under either. So yeah, it is at 6 thousandths. That's as good as it's going to get. So that's good, and we'll do the same thing. So now we've checked this one. The intake is good. Exhaust should be 12 thousandths. Let's try that. See if we can get that one under there. And no, I can't get it. Can't pass 12 thousandths through there. Let's see what we can pass through. 10 thousandths. Nope. All right, 9 thousandths I can get through there. All right, so this is about 9 thousandths. It's supposed to be 12 thousandths, so we're 3 thousandths off there. All right, so I want to write this down. So we're at cylinder number 1, checking the intake and the exhaust. So intake number 1, which is all we've checked so far, is at 6 thousandths. So the exhaust number 1 is at 9 thousandths. This is the camshaft lobe number 1 on the intake, and then number 2 is right next to it here, and it's in the same position as that one. The lobe is right up at the top here. So I'm going to go ahead. The first one was right at 6 thousandths. Let's see if this one is as well. It's harder to get to this one in the middle, but oh, all right. So 6 thousandths goes through, no problem. That one is at least 6 thousandths. Let's see if it will go higher. Let's see if we can get 7 thousandths in there or not. Not quite. Almost. Not quite. So the intake is good. The exhaust, let's see what we got. So let's start with 12 thousandths and see where it goes. All right, so again, I can't get 12 thousandths on the exhaust. I'm jumping straight to 9 thousandths and see if I can get that one in there. Not quite, almost. So that one is less than that. All right, so now 8 thousandths. Let's see if that fits in here. Yeah, 8 thousandths will fit in. All right, so on my intake, 6 thousandths again. And my exhaust, 8 thousandths. So there's one whole cylinder done. Now with this information, we know that our intakes are good. We don't have to adjust those. Our exhausts are bad. We do need to adjust those because this is supposed to be 12 thousandths plus or minus 1 thousandths. So we're off 3 thousandths here and 4 thousandths there. So we definitely need to adjust these valves to get these within spec. So that means getting different spacers, different size spacers, or taking out the spacers that are in there so that we can bring this down to where we need to be. We currently have the spacers are too big. We need ones that are shorter or smaller spacers to bring up our clearances here. All right, so here's your intake. You can see the lobes right there for the cylinder number 1. I'm going to go down to cylinder number 3. You can see the lobe, the camshaft lobe is there on the intake, and then the exhaust lobe is right there. So these are sort of the lobe on this one. The intake is pointed down. This one is pointed up right now. I'm going to rotate our crankshaft down here so it goes to 3T. And that should rotate our lobes around up here to where we want them. So and that should bring our camshaft lobes up and around so that we can get our clearance readings on them. All right, so 3T. All right, it says 3T there. Our valves are up. Our lobes are up. You can now see the lobe is up here and the other lobe is up here. They're sort of pointed up and out. And now we should be able to get in here with our feelers and read these valve clearances. So same thing as cylinder number 1. I'm going to go through and do the exact same stuff. So I'm going to start with 6 thousandths on the intake and see if that works. See if that fits. So cylinder number 3, we got 6 thousandths 6 thousandths, and then we got 9 thousandths for both of the exhausts. All right, now we're going to move to cylinder number 2, which is this guy up in front here, and I'm going to move this guy to 2T. All right, that's a 2T. Let's see. All right, so it's hard to show on camera, but on the front cylinder head, it's a little bit different than the rear cylinder head. On the rear, we had the lobes. When they were in the right position, the lobes came up on the camshaft and pointed out. On the front, it's a little bit different. They come up, but they're pointed in. And you can also test this by doing a straw, the straw test. So if you have a straw like this guy, you can actually pull the spark plug like so, and then stick your straw down in there so it comes into contact with the top of the piston. And then as you rotate the engine around, the straw will lift up and down. And what that tells you, or what this does, what the straw trick does for you, is tell you when the piston is at top dead center, because your lobes, your camshaft lobes, are going to the correct position once, but the piston will come to the top dead center twice. So you need 3 things to be in alignment here to have this at the correct spot that you can read the clearances. 1, this has to be a top dead center. 2, you have to have the index marks lined up down here. So for this cylinder is cylinder 3, so you've got to have 3T lined up over here on your crankshaft, have that indexed correctly. Then you have to have piston at top dead center, and you have to have the lobes pointed up. So let's rotate this engine around so you can see now it's coming up. The piston is coming up, and now it's going back down again. Make sure this doesn't catch. There we go. And it's going down. Going down. That's to the bottom. Now it's coming up again. And so you can see, you can use this straw to tell you when this piston's at the top. Right there, it's at the top. So this is, again, see, this is where we want to be, because the lobes are pointed up, the piston's at the top, and then this mark, yeah, and then our mark down here is at 3T, is indexed at the top of our crankshaft there. And then now when we read these guys, we'll get the correct readings. All right, so now I'm going to go ahead and check the ones on the front. Cylinder number 2, which is hard to videotape from here, so I will come right back when I'm done with that. All right, so our results for number 2, everything's off on here. This one's within range. This is within spec. We could leave that one alone. But this one's off by 2 thousandths. This one's off by 6 thousandths, and this one's off by 5 thousandths. So the exhaust so far is definitely way off on this bike. Let's do number 4, our last one, and see what we get. Number 4 cylinder is at the front and towards the right side of the bike. So it's this cylinder right here. I'm going to go ahead on our crankshaft and see if we can rotate this around to 4T. Alright, so 4T is indexed at the top of our crankshaft right now, and so over here our lobes should be up and in. You can see in here, there's the top of one lobe right there, and the other lobe on the front cylinder head. On both cylinders, the lobes are up and in when they're aligned correctly. Alright, so I'm going to go ahead and get my measurements on here and see what we've got for cylinder number 4. Alright, so here are our final readings. I've got everything laid out on here so that I won't forget it. And also, this helps me to reference. Now I can go and figure out if I need to order shims, what size shims I need and how many I need to order. Alright, so we want to adjust valves. We're going to start with the rear cylinder head here. I'm going to do, and this is cylinder number 1, and this is cylinder number 3. So if I look here at cylinder number 1, I've got, this is within spec there. It's within spec there. Those are both the intake valves, and this is out of spec, and this is out of spec. This is on the exhaust valve. The exhaust should be 12 thousandths. So these are too small by 2 thousandths. So I need my shim to be smaller by 2 thousandths. So I'm going to start by taking the cams off so we can get access to the valve lifters. So to do that involves removing this big piece here is all one piece. This is like cam holder A, and then these two guys here are cam holder B. And you can see I've marked these. It's an F for the front part of the engine and an R for the rear part of the engine. And this is marked right here with an IN at the top. You can see right there. That indicates this is on the intake side. And so the orientation of that when you put it back on is marked from the factory. So there are like 8 bolts that hold this guy on. There's 2 on the center here, and then there's 2 on the outside. And these just have the 2 right there. Note that these guys on the interior have a little crush washer on there. A little copper crush washer. That's just these 4 right here. The ones on the outside have no washer on them. And these need to be replaced. You need to put new crush washers on there when we put this back on. And these have little dowel pins on the bottom there. That's why this is so hard to get off. And I have also marked my camshafts here. This is the front. This guy here is the rear. All right, so I've recently been in here. I've replaced the rubber O-rings right here and right here. I would recommend doing that if you're going in here. These are our lifters. This is what we're after in terms of our valve job. These guys here and these guys here. These little nice silver circles. These come out. I'm going to use a magnet, pull these out one at a time. And so our intake are these guys here. So these 4 up here are our intake. This is our exhaust on the bottom. So our intakes for cylinder number 1, which is this guy right here. So this is our intake. This is our exhaust on cylinder number 1. These 4 here. Our intakes were good. Those were within spec. So I'm going to leave those alone. It's just these exhausts. These were out of spec. So I'm going to pull off each of those individually. Just using a little magnet here. Pull that guy out, and that is our lifter. And on the underside of that lifter is our shim, that little circle inside there. So that comes off and it fits inside this little part here of the lifter retainer. But they do have a tendency to stick to the actual lifter itself when you pull them out. So it stays in there pretty good, but it will, if you're not careful with it, it will fall out. All right, so this is my shim kit I'm using. I'll put a link in the description for this guy. This is also assembly lube that I'm using on this project to, when we reassemble, put the lifters back in there. I'll put some lube on there so that when it starts up, the engine starts up, they're not dry. So this is like a full kit. So, and I hope we have everything we need, but these are all individually different sized shims. So we can swap stuff out as needed for bigger or smaller shims. So let's pull the shim out we've got. So this is the lifter we just took off the engine. We pulled that shim out of there. Oh, no, we got it. All right, so there it is right here. So here's our shim that I just took out. I'm gonna measure this guy. All right, so the shim we just took out is 0.066. I need one that gives me more room, so it's actually smaller. So I need one that is 0.64. 0.064, that one. So just one size smaller. So this is our new shim. I could try and stick it in here, but I'm actually going to stick it on the valve. All right, so my shim I'm going to stick right here in this little recess on top of the valve, which is where it's supposed to live. This is that little circle on the very inside. That is the valve stem. And so stick it in there. I'm going to use a little bit of assembly lube as sort of glue to sort of give it something to stick to. We've got our lifter, and I'm also going to put some assembly lube on that as well, so that that goes in there. It slides around real nice. Put some on the top for the when it comes into contact with the cam lobes. Stick that guy back in. And that one is done. Hopefully, we don't have to come back to that. I will check this stuff. I'll put everything back together and we'll check the valve clearances again and make sure we actually did what we set out to do. So that's it. Basically, that is valve shimming, valve adjustment with these shims, and I will go ahead and go through the rest of these. This next exhaust valve here, again, we got our little shim down in there. Grab that guy out. We'll replace it with the same size shim probably. All right, now I want to reinstall my camshafts back here. I have purposely not taken the camshafts off the front. I'm doing one cylinder head at a time so that it's easier to put the camshafts back in afterwards. To do the rear, I'm going to turn the crankshaft down here, our pulse generator, until we've got, so I line up the 4T mark down here on our index. Then I'm going to check my camshafts over here to see where our lines. All right, so our lines on our camshaft, our index lines are pointing in. They're right here. There's one right there. There's one right there. So they're pointing in towards the center. We want them so they're on the outside. So to do that, I need to rotate this crankshaft around again to the 4T all the way around. All right, let's rotate it around. Our index lines are over here and over here. So this is set up the way it should be. All right, now I want to rotate the crankshaft again. So it's at the, so we bring the 3T, which is currently right here. We're going to bring it around up to our index mark right there. So it's about 270 degrees rotation. All right, so now we should be able to reinstall our camshafts over here with our index lines on the outside, facing the outside, parallel with the top line of the head here. I've got my rear camshaft here, marked with my little R on there. I'm gonna install this guy. I've already put assembly lube on here. You can kind of see it there, the little white stuff on the lobes and where it contacts the journals here. And I put some on the journals themselves. So that is all greased up. I'm gonna stick this guy in here and I'm trying to assemble it. You can see that little line right there. That line should run parallel with the top of the head here. So I'm gonna install it that way. Try and line that up as best I can. Take our other head, the one that is marked F for front. I'm gonna do the same thing. That's also got a little little line on it, you can see there. So install that line so it is parallel with the head right here and is facing out. It should be facing out that way. All right, so you should be able to see that line there, and same deal with that line there. All right, now we can go ahead and reinstall. I've got the O-rings replaced in here as well. I'm gonna reinstall my holder here. There's also some O-rings on the outside of this holder. There's two there. I've also replaced those. You'll note the top here, we have this IN for intake side. So that side goes up here next to these intake boots. So for the 4 bolts that are in the center, these guys have little crush washers on them. You can see that. I've got new crush washers right here to put on there. The ones on the outside, these 4 here, do not have crush washers. Again, on these bolts we want to oil the threads and oil the seating surface back here. And then I've got my other holders. This has this little bump out on this one side that goes towards the inside here, like this. The rear one, same deal. All right, I'm just snugging these down for right now. All right, these get torqued down to 9 foot-pounds ultimately, but we want to take 2 or 3 steps to get there. We want to try and do it in crisscross pattern. I'm going to start with the inside. So I'll crisscross these guys, and then we'll go crisscross the ones on the outside, and then we'll do these guys over here. I'm going to do this in like 2 steps, I think. Start with a lower torque, and we'll work our way up here. All right, going to the next torque here. Well, actually, our next step would be to make sure that this thing is timed correctly. Then put our valve cover back on, and then we're done. All right, we're now moving on to the front cylinder head, and we're going to take the camshafts off of this, and we're going to change out our valve shims on this guy up here. All right, now I'm going to do all my little grommets and O-rings and etc. Get these things off of here. Well, I guess we'll start with these. I throw some of this stuff on there to make sure we get this, whatever this stuff that's on here, it's clearly something. All right, so I think I'm going to add a little dab of this RTV onto this backside of these gaskets just to hold them in, because they do seem to want to fall out. And when I turn this thing upside down to put it on the bike, I'm afraid that it's going to be very frustrating. I'm going to do similar with this guy. There we are. See it? That's probably way more than I need. All right, now I've got new little seals for the bolts that go on here. If you get the OEM ones, they have a little up. It says up on the one side. This one does not, so I've got to use my best judgment. This guy here is basically a little metal washer with rubber on one side of it. He also has a little sort of ridge in the middle there that pops up. This is the side that faces out. So this is the rubber side, where the rubber is over here, and our bolt goes in like that. All right, and these get torqued to 7 foot-pounds ultimately. I'm gonna do it in a 2-part sequence because I need to let this silicone stuff dry a little bit. According to the instructions, it would be an hour normally, but we're using the RTV in a little bit different way because we're just doing those corners, so I'm not going to let it dry that long. So I'm going to do a 2-part torque sequence here.